Everyone, and welcome back. So today it's a kind of a flashback. It's an older video I did ages ago that I am properly uploading now because the channel has changed and there's a lot more stuff that's come on here, a lot better quality, hopefully, that's in my videos. So I thought I'd re-upload this older video which has the information you need, but just with this little bit thing beforehand. So I'm going to be doing the original PlayStation, the very first one, not the re-uploads, not the PS1. PS1 is not the original, it's the original PlayStation. So let's get into it and you'll see a slight change in quality of the video, but I hope you bear with us and enjoy the review. We're going to be reviewing the original PlayStation. Now, many of you may know the original PlayStation is getting onto its 30th birthday now. We're very, very close to that birthday in a couple of years' time. So I thought it was about time to review this. It's one of my very first game systems. I had the original NES, of course. I think anybody in my age group did have the NES because it was just what you got. But the Sony PlayStation is also one which I think is important to talk about, especially considering the background to this. So I will go into a bit more of the fun stuff in a second, but the thing I think we should mention is that this was the start of near enough domination for the PlayStation. Now, obviously, nowadays we think, well, it's a two-horse race. It's Xbox and the PlayStation. Now, for some people, of course, including myself, if we're playing newer games, we play PC. But when we talk consoles, that's usually who we break it down to. However, if we go back to the 80s and 90s, Sony really wasn't part of that discussion. Sony wasn't anywhere near that discussion. It had looked around for quite a while for who to work with. It didn't want to go it alone. It didn't feel it could. It thought it was too much of a risk. If we look back, the best games out there at the time were things like Pong. This wasn't something that was necessarily going to be making money. So they knocked on a lot of doors. They originally tried to partner with Sega. That fell through. They even then knocked on the door of Nintendo, and Nintendo, who became the big boys of the 80s, really, when it comes to gaming systems. Nintendo had a somewhat dodgy verbal agreement with Sony that they would work with them on the new system, and then publicly came out as working with Philips, and then went on to make the NES, the SNES, and everything that's come afterwards. So if Sony was going to get into the market of video games, this was the only way they were going to do it. They were going to have to go it alone. They'd been let down. They didn't really have any backdoors in anymore, and they had to go it alone. And the result was the Sony PlayStation 1, the original big boy PlayStation. I say big boy because when you put this to the PS1, not the PlayStation 1, which is this, the PS1, which was released, which is much smaller and much more curved version of this does seem like the big boy. Obviously, if you put this up to PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and everything else, it doesn't seem it anymore. But this was the start of PlayStation really pushing themselves into the market with games. And again, if you ask anybody nowadays, any gamer, any young person out there, who are we talking about when we talk about games consoles? It's Xbox and PlayStation. But this very nearly did not happen. And the PlayStation 1 was the one that really helped them get that mark of recognition from everybody. And it was somewhat revolutionary of its time, the fact that you could actually have specific exclusives that it had that nobody else really had. So you had Final Fantasies, the one that everyone really knows now. Final Fantasy was on there. Crash Bandicoot was on there. Tekken 2, everything else. You also had some of the cross-platforms like Rayman, which is what I enjoyed playing, as well as Wipeout and many, many other ones. That actually, those exclusives really pushed them forward, especially ones like Tekken, which I think a lot of people knew from their time in arcades, and arcades was the bigger thing in the 80s. You didn't really bring it home. And so when this came out in 1995, after the release of the NES, 10 years earlier in 1985, 84, depending on where you were, it really did push things forward. And so those exclusives, those building on what already happened, really did mean that PlayStation became part of the discussion. So let's have a bit more of a look at this. So here we go, the Sony PlayStation 1. So as you can see, it has memory cards. Now that is something that was actually pretty new, pretty revolutionary for its time. If you think of the NES, the SNES, anything like that, didn't really have memory cards, didn't have anything like that. No, obviously this came out in 95 and 1990. You had the Neo Geo AES, which was the first to have memory cards, but it was quite a revolutionary thing for its time. There you can see it is made specifically for those CDs, and in fact did play CDs. You get some little extras on the CDs as well that were made just for it. But it was a big thing. Some people used it as their main CD player. Obviously, I've got Rayman there as well. The controller is also one of the biggest new things at the time with Sony. If any of you remember the NES, it was not the most easy to play with. This is obviously made for your hands. This is way easier to play with and just specifically for you. And it was just so much nicer to hold over a specific period of time rather than the clunky square thing. You can also see with this system, it just looks so nice. It just has a great aesthetic to it that I think is very specific to the PlayStation, obviously, and great all round. So let's have a look at some gameplay. So here we have some of the Tekken gameplay, which, of course, as I said, is just one of my favorite things to come out of the PlayStation. Now, I was a NES person. I had the NES. I had the original Nintendo, but I very much kind of changed my thoughts after that to things like the PlayStation. That's what I played for probably the longest time, although I have some very fond memories of all the game systems I've played on. Tekken was one of the big ones for me. The main reason being it meant I could play these kind of games outside of the arcade. Everywhere else, I had seen these kind of games, Street Fighter, that kind of thing, anything like that. Tekken was in an arcade, very different setup. And of course, having to pay every time to play it. So this was just amazing. And the graphics for the time period away from the arcade was just something that was really kind of unheard of. You didn't expect it at all at the time. And because, as I say, how smooth and how easy it was with the new handheld, it made it just so much easier with the controller to actually play these games rather than it digging into your hand or being clunky. This was made far more for your hands. It made it far easier to make those movements, to do those combinations and everything that you needed. And it was just perfect for its time. Now here, obviously, we also have some Rayman, which I showed you is one of the games I actually have in my little collection. Obviously, I bought the PlayStation back. That isn't my original console. I sold that console some time ago. This is a buyback. Although I have to say, if you're looking to buy one, it only cost me £10, which is around $12, $13 to get that system back. So absolutely worth it. But here with Rayman, you can see these platform games were just amazing at the time. They've kind of fallen out of fashion to a point of this kind of game anyway. Although Rayman, as well as Crash Bandicoot and many others, have been re-released, but I think their heyday was really the time of the PlayStation 1, and you can see why. I mean, this was just a fun game to play. It was one that basically everyone could do as well. It was very simplistic. Yeah, you could dive a little bit here and there, but it was just so colorful and just amazing. It very much was. So yeah, I would absolutely suggest. I know there's a lot of nostalgia for the PlayStation 2 because of a few changes and the playing of DVDs and the backwards capability of the PlayStation 2. But really, I think for the gaming industry, the PlayStation 1 really does need to be thought of far higher and actually has a place in gaming history that is many times overlooked. As I say, because of that time period that Sony really had to put its colors to the mast and say, no, we are entering into this industry here. And I think, as you can see, just in the gameplay, from the feel of everything as well, it was definitely worth it. So I hope you've enjoyed this review, and I will see you next time.